Alright, this is Scott Augustine for CardRunners.com doing the third installment of my 4-part 6 max 510 deep no limit series. If you remember in the last part we ended with my fold of the Queen 10 suited after I was floating Gale Force in the bottom right. Now for the first probably 5-10 minutes, next few orbits on each table, I make a couple misplays during the hands. I've already went through and recorded this once, but something happened with the audio not recording correctly, so hopefully that rectifies itself on this run. And I think it's really important when you see that you're not playing well, or you get into a couple of tricky spots that you wouldn't normally get into, and you kind of get to the river and you're just looking back and like, how the hell did I get here? When that happens, it's really important to make sure that you're being very self-aware with both your game and your image. In terms of your image, making sure that you recognize what parts of that information the people have seen and how you expect them to react. And then also with your game itself, if you're just not playing very well, try to right the ship for maybe 10-15 more minutes, and if it's not going well and you're constantly just making bad decisions or it's just not working out, well then just kind of quit and start a new session or take a half-hour break, something along those lines. And so at this point, probably 10 minutes into this segment, I'll start to realize that I'm not playing particularly crisp, and so I think I do a good job of writing myself though by the end of this segment. So I wouldn't have to quit along those guidelines that I just laid out. In the bottom right, I flat preflop with the King 8 suited to Gale Force open. He's opening basically 100% of his buttons. I get an alright flop in the fact that I'm probably still ahead and I decide to call here. He's making those small little continuation bets that I had mentioned in the other segment that Marmota was doing before, and then they kind of pound the turn and river, or maybe just the river, something along those lines. And it's kind of with these like ascending betting structures compared to like the pot. So on the flop they bet always like a quarter of the pot. The turn they bet a little bigger, and then the river they just pound the river. You kind of have to plan out your head much further in advance than you would against some players that are more apt to shut down or have even more just level bet sizing compared to the pot. If someone always bets 2/3 of the pot, then you can kind of try to figure out things, whereas on this against the type of player who exhibits this type of betting pattern, it's much more important to figure out where you're going to be by the river to find out what you're going to do to those large bets, because you know they're coming. So it's important that you use the bets when it's like $18 to figure out what you want to do when it's $215. I think I make a mistake here on the turn by check calling with the King 8. I don't think I'm ahead enough. I'm ahead enough of the time to call, but his range, obviously, whatever he has is going to have equity against me. And also, I don't really want... If I had Ace-8 here, it's a much better call, just because then I'm beating like his King-Jacks and whatever. King-8 is just a really hard sell that I'm going to make it there. And with a person who I've labeled as this type of betting pattern of just bombing the river, I know I'm going to face a big bet on the river, and so unless I improve, and even if I do to like an 8, I still might not be best. I think it's best to just hold the turn there. Changing how I play the hand, I might want to either check raise or lead the flop. I think leading the flop's kind of cool there. I bring up my only note on Gale Force, which is that his pre-flop big re-raise out of position here is almost always his king. And then I pace 2 hands where his 4 bets were bigger with ace king, and like hands like with his draws and his ace kings and whatever, he's trying to price himself into hands and then with his made hands he's trying to induce by having other people make mistakes. So his bet sizing's a little smaller when he has made hands. And then I do fold in the bottom right. Now eventually, after thinking of check raising, I guess. The problem is here, people really screw up the check raising range, especially at the middle stakes. They get to the river with a hand that they're like, okay, I don't think I'm good anymore, so I can't call. Well, what if I check raise? And you can't, if you get to the river and you think, okay, maybe I can check raise now, well then you shouldn't be check raising as a bluff. Just because if you didn't plan it out before, chances are it's going to look to a decent hand reader like exactly what it is. sometimes you can just get away with it randomly against kind of poorer players of, okay, he's betting whenever he bets full pot on the river here, he's never got a huge hand. I can check raise him off here by representing something. I don't even know what you represent on this board. I guess like a slow play 2 or pocket 4s that picked up on the turn. And so when you're looking to create a check raise in the river range, especially deep, you can't just wait to the river to plan that out. You need to be able to do it beforehand. So though I think I made a mistake here on the turn, I think I saved myself a much bigger mistake that some people might try to make by check raising that river there without any sort of plan or reasoning behind it, just being like, oh, he probably doesn't have much. I raise Jack's the Doberman in the top left, his right here. I raise his limp with the 8-7 suited. He'd been limping a lot against me, and I've been kind of just running him over in the blinds. And if you remember in the second installment, there was the hand where I check raised a turn draw and then check called when I hit it, and he showed a misdraw and stacked him on the bottom right table. So that hand, though it was in the second segment, like compared to this, it actually in like game time of this session was only like 10 or 15 minutes before. And so that hand's still really fresh in his mind. He's probably not used to bluffing off $1,000 or $1,200, whatever. He's probably still kicking himself about it. I can really pick up a lot of value when it's blind versus blind here, because unless he's got a piece, he's not going to continue out of position, because he doesn't want to go further down that avenue of just kind of in his mind spewing off chips. He's not going to want to just be throwing away his money bluffing. He's going to rather wait for good solid hands and then be betting there, which is why I like my pre-flop and my flop bet here. My turn check's okay. I could also bet it there to protect against like some one diamond hands or whatever. But I think just checking it down, trying to get to showdowns here is pretty good. And then he bets on the river, and for at the time, I didn't think like I did just described of what he was doing. I was kind of distracted of where I thought his mindset might be, and when he half pots, and I didn't think there was many diamonds he'd bet for value less than a nut diamond. So I decided to look him up here, but I think it's a pretty bad call. You will see though that he check called with ace-9 offsuit. With the ace of diamonds, with the backdoor diamond, and so I think he played his hand pretty poorly as well. And we can use that information. Yeah, he got there, and he's going to just look at his hand and be like, okay, wow, he paid me off with 8-7. Don't bluff him. But in reality, I'm going to get a lot more information off that. I'm going to realize that double barreling him on this flop, this type of board texture, is going to be hugely profitable, because he's looking me up with ace high here on a fairly coordinated board. That's just not, his hand's not going to improve often enough to continue, and it's not going to be good enough to get to showdown, because I won't let him. On the top right, I don't know who this boxer Honky Tonk is. I raised, he had like 730 to start the hand. I decided that he was probably a Fisher player because I didn't see him ever before. He wasn't around in the session or in any of the other tables. He bought in for 3/4 of stack. Pretty much the general reasoning of why you would just blindly think someone's not as good. And so I see with this flop, I think I get a lot of folds out of like ace-4, ace rag hands. Like ace-4 probably doesn't fold. Probably like ace-7, ace-8 suited folds. Like 6s probably fold on this turn a decent amount. King-queen that floated for whatever reason. And then so once I hit I bet the turn and he calls, I'm pretty much done with the hand unless I improve. Even with the jack, it's going to make it a little tricky, because I think a huge part of his range for this hitting this river is a 10. And I think he's going to have a lot of like jack 10s in his range more than queen 10. Just people tend to play jack 10 a little more, that are of the skill level, probably a little more than queen 10. In general, it's probably a negligible difference, but it's definitely a difference there. And I decided value bet here just because I think I've never beat. If he raises, I'd probably fold. I don't really see him bluff, this type of player ever bluffing here. But I think I can represent missed spades. I can represent just trying to buy the pot, and I think my bet size is pretty good over there. I raise pocket 9s in the top left. I see bet the flop once, and then we get to showdown, and we see that the axis is just defending and check calling with ace-7 offsuit, so we're going to peg him as a weaker passive player immediately. I see bet in the bottom right against clock tower, the ace-king. I hit a king-king 10 flop, obviously awesome for me. And I looked to see, and Honky Tonk did have ace-10 there. And he check raises. On this type of board texture, a button versus blind, blind defending, you're not going to get check raised too much, especially deep here. Like, I don't think he's check raising with like ace 10 for value, which is probably all right. He might make money doing that. I don't know, because I think I would float this check raise a decent amount of the time. But because of that, on this board, I decided to 3-bet here, and it's kind of a toss-up here between 3-betting. Not really a toss-up. You should be flatting here more than 3-betting. The reason you should flat here more than 3-betting, even though I did this particular time, and it's important to mix it up sometimes, and I thought this type of player might get a little curious and try to pull a big move on me here, because my 3-bet on this flop is really not representing much at all other than the exact hand I have, save maybe a few others that are really strong, and it's hard to have really strong hands button versus blind, so I thought he might be more apt to make a move here. And I thought if he was bluffing, he wouldn't continue on the turn if I did flat very often. The downside of 3-betting here is it probably pushes out like queen jack, or like some gut shots that decide, like ace jack, ace queen, or whatever, that decide to check raise here, because if he does hit his ace with any of those hands, I have that ace covered, and I can make a lot more money off him if like he has queen jack and then an ace spikes by just flatting here. So I definitely like a flat a lot of the time, and against pretty much anyone else at that table. Now Gale Force, I'd probably 3-bet bluff here, or 3-bet here too. Those two players though that I thought were a little more skeptical of everything I was doing, a 3-bet bluff there is prudent sometimes. And we see the showdown of the ace 7 in the top left. And I think, yeah, the X. There arises a pretty decent cold 4-betting opportunity for me here. Our stacks are pretty deep against Jack. We're starting with like 180 big blinds at the start of the hand, and I almost do 4-bet him. I'm not sure exactly why I didn't. Maybe because I just felt like he was getting fed up with me and he was just going to shove in or something. But I think it's a pretty good spot because the axis is just opening basically any two cards on the top left. Jack is probably realizing that, and even if he's not, and he's doing it with a pretty solid range, my ace-10 suited plays alright if he just flashed my 4-bet, and I can also really read his hands pretty well at this point after playing with him for the session. So I think I can overcome that the times he doesn't fold. Gale opens pretty much any two cards on this button here when I'm the only blind. He makes it a little bigger, so I thought he was probably stealing a little more, and I decided to raise ace-jack offsuit there. I c-bet the flop, and this was the hand where I think acted as a pretty good barometer of me realizing that I probably wasn't playing very well here, and it's definitely important to kind of just, as I said, just right the ship. Always kind of just check that you're staying on course with trying to play your A game. And right here, I just don't think I was. And it's obviously fine when you play a few thousand hands every day or whatever. You're going to make a mistake in a few hands here and there. It's just important to both A, realize that you're making those mistakes, and B, realize that you should either quit if you can't stop making those mistakes for that session. Here's the mistake. I float his checker or his flop raise here because with that note I had, I thought he would raise ace king on this like pre-flop a lot of the time, and so if he had like king jack here, I didn't think he would raise my c-bet here very often. I think his raise up here is much more indicative of like air 4-4, 3-3, and then like king 4, king 3 or whatever, but I didn't think he'd defend king 3 and king 4 very often, and so I was pretty much putting him on like 3-4, a set, or a flush draw, or air. And I thought his air he would shut down a decent amount of the time. If I'm going to continue here, I should be shoving in to represent that I have a flush or a hand like that just doesn't want to see like a fourth club come, like a set or something. And I think calling's definitely by far the worst option, and I'm not exactly sure why I called here. I'm assuming I had some sort of read that he was going to shut down on the river from some sort of other session that I played earlier against him, but I think in a vacuum that call on the turn is very bad. Definitely like a shove there a small percentage of the time, and a fold there a large percent. I 3-bet Jack in the top left, and he's just gonna get eaten alive in there. He's just he's not confident post flop enough to play me deep out of position, and so he should just be kind of just surrendering a lot of his small blinds and probably even leave the table if he's not willing to surrender those small blinds. The only reason he should stay is if, like, the axis, who is kind of fishier, if he thinks he's just going to stack off soon, because he's not obviously not going to be winning anything from Stork comparatively, because Stork's a better player than him. I raise the Jack-10 here. It's a little loose in terms of just an opening range of, like, four-handed first to act Jack-10. It's probably near the threshold of where I open in general. But Stork was kind of playing a bunch of tables at the time, and he wasn't really messing with me at this point. And then the axis is obviously weaker and passive, and Jack is more passive and weak. So against those two blinds, I'm going to be stealing this top left table a ton. Jackie Chong posts, I decide to raise up here. And you have to be careful in these situations, because when there's a blind here, yeah, there's more incentive to steal, but also people are going to give you much less credit. Even though I'm raising from early position, people are going to give me less credit than they normally would because of that extra incentive there. They think I'm just going to start stealing or whatever. And I mean, I have queen 6 suited. It's obviously a reason that I'm doing that. I 3-bet 9-10 offsuit in the bottom left against Stork. I hadn't really been messing with him much in terms of his opens. We'd been kind of leaving each other together. The table at the bottom left is a really good table. This Fish yesterday, this Up the Town, and the It's Me Nemo are all pretty poor players. And Clock Tower has been a pretty decent player during this session. I'm not sure if he plays higher or not. I don't think I've played him higher. But he's definitely a winning regular at these 5-10 games from the session I saw. In terms of just, I'm not sure if he won this session, but in the moves he was making and whatever. In the top left, I know I said I wasn't going to be like doing much against this Fisher player, just kind of show him a hand, this the axis, because he did defend with like a7 offsuit, and I didn't think he was going to be folding a lot of hands. But this board, I just envision him peeling with so much, and I can triple barrel so many rivers that I decided. And this type of player, if he has a hand that's capable of calling a triple barrel on the river, unless he improves his hand on the river, he's going to raise on the turn. So when he just flats here, if he just did flat here, it opens up a lot of opportunity for a triple barrel. That being said, I decided to go with the turn overbet here, because as I did say, I thought that his flop flatten range after pre-flop is very weak compared to the hands I can represent, and if he is drawing, this will shut him out, and so I don't have to worry about like having to triple barrel or not. If like a heart hits, do I triple barrel? Will he put me on missed diamonds? All these things. This overbet, it doesn't gain the value of getting called by him that a triple barrel would, but I think it gains a lot of fold equity there by just throwing 230 up there. And in a bad player's eyes, he's just, in his mind, he's like, oh, he's got to have a big hand. The board's so dry, he's wanting to protect it. And it's important to realize when you're deciding to overbet or even underbet or with deciding bet sizing, the opponent you're against, what your ranges are, and also like what he's going to interpret that as. I thought he would think an overbet is me scared to death of the board, protecting a big hand, and it would get a lot of folds, so I did it with a bluff. I c-bet the flop on the bottom left. There's two hands going on right now. In the top right, we'll go with that one first because there's less decision. In the top right, I 3-bet pre-flop against Moy Rums. DW balls flatted me. That's generally a hand like, especially this deep, it's generally a hand like ace-king, ace-queen, or like queens, jacks, tens, whatever. And so I was planning on betting here and then barreling through on some favorable turns that looked like I shouldn't be betting without a big hand. And that's the thing, on a 4-3-3 board, DW Balls is a smart enough player to realize that I shouldn't be betting very often unless I have a strong hand, because I shouldn't expect him to fold anything he flatted pre-flop with to my 3-bet on this board, because the board like didn't change anything from pre-flop. So if he's flatting pre-flop, he still has the best hand. So when that's the case, against a smarter player, a lot of the times you can convince them that you do have a big hand by just kind of like triple barreling through, because it just looks like I should never be bluffing here. And so my plan was probably to double barrel a decent amount of turns, maybe check give up some of them, but he does in fact raise here. And when he does that, I think it's a decent opportunity for me to shove in and try to make him fold like tens, I think it might have a small chance of working sometimes, but I definitely can't do that all the time because he is just going to snap me off a lot of the time. And against Stork here, he leads out again for 400, which if you remember back from one of the earlier segments, he had done that at an exact ace turn again, where it's a turn that should be improving my range compared to his, and he's taken hold of the action. And so I have two options here. I'm definitely not folding. I could either call or raise. I actually called here, but I think in retrospect I prefer shoving. And the reasons why is if I had a really strong hand like aces, kings, even ace king, whatever, I think I would shove here a lot of the time. Just because the board's so dry, I don't want him to get scared off if he has like pocket jacks and I've got aces, or if he's got queen jack of hearts. He's got a huge hand, but if I shove here I can shut that huge hand out, something along those lines. And so with my bluff here of 9-10, I have equity against any part of his range except for the mate straight of queen 10, and if he has that, well, good for him. I think I like a shove here best. I end up flatting just because I couldn't keep folding to him doing this, and I do have some equity in the hand. And there are some hands that I can rep, like ace-queen when I flat here. I can rep a lot of things that he might shut down on, and I can also rep like a turn flush draw myself that he might give me credit for if hearts hit. So I was planning on betting a lot of heart rivers if he checked, and it didn't look like he was checking to induce. And it's kind of hard to determine. It's just something that comes from playing with a player a lot of the time. Like, I'm sure I have timing tells against some of these players that are like, I mean, I haven't played with a ton of people here except for Stork and DW, so I'm sure they've got some reads on things and size and I do and stuff. And it's important just to try your hardest to switch those up. I do hit my straight there, which is obviously awesome, but he checks and then folds, which I think makes it look like his hand was a lot of like 8-9 of hearts hands, Jack 10 of hearts, something along those lines. So when I jam, I'm just basically hoping he has a set there and he's trapping with his like pocket eights, jacks, or whatever, and I'm repping like missed hearts. And it's not a terrible thing either when I do get to showdown here and I call, and then let's say the river was like a 6 of clubs. I wasn't planning on bluffing that river, and let's say we get to showdown and I see that he has like jack 10 of hearts or whatever. It'll help me develop his leading range here because he's done it a few times, and we're going to get into that situation a lot more. So it's not even a terrible scenario when we call there just to hit our straight, and then if we don't, we can bluff hearts. If a heart or the straight doesn't come, we get to see his hand anyway. So there's a lot of good factors about flatting there as opposed to shoving, but I think shoving overall is going to let me rep a stronger range and get a lot more folds out of him and netted me a higher profit. I don't know who code number 8 is in the bottom right, but he seems to be playing pretty tight so far because we haven't seen any big hands he's been involved in, so I'm just going to assume he's a pretty tight player. I don't think he's a regular because he didn't buy in deep. Most regulars do buy in deep. Some regulars though only prefer 100 big blind stacks, so it could be one of those, but considering he's not at other tables, nor did I see him during the rest of the session, I don't think he's a regular. King 7 offsuit, it's a little weak to flat there out of position. If I had King 7 suited, I'd probably flat there against Gale Force in the top right. Or at least defend, rather than flat as a terminology. This, in the bottom left, I have queens. Clock tower will flat me, and then everyone else folds. We'll get back to that in a second. In the top left, the axis flats me again. He's been flatting me a ton of time. I think his flatting range, since he's been flatting so much, contains like much stronger hands than you would think four-handed. So I think his flatting range contains a lot of hands like ace queen, maybe pocket tens, pocket jacks that you wouldn't expect a lot of regulars to have in their flatting range four-handed, even deep. And so we have to definitely be wary of that, and I think that means when he does put in a check raise or shows interest towards a pot, he's going to have a stronger middle part of his range than we normally would think. It's not just going to be like semi-bluffs and like sets on this board. It's going to be like hands like nines, jacks, and whatever that are just check raising to protect their hand, and because he thinks he has the best hand and get charge draws. That's why I don't think a jam's very prudent on the top left, because I just don't think you have very much fold equity. He's been pretty passive. We saw him with top pair, just check call down out of position. So I think he's got a pretty big hand here. He's letting me pretty decent odds on the flop to appeal, and then on the turn, if he made it a little smaller or we were a little deeper, I think I'd peel again, but I decided to just give it up here. With the backdoor flush coming, it also kind of dirties some of my outs, because if the river's like a 4 of diamonds, he's going to be fairly reluctant to put a ton of money in himself. Though the stack size is a pretty decent 4, like I don't think he's ever getting away from a big hand. If I do hit my straight, I think it's going to be a little tricky to extract max value. If a diamond comes, he might like check fold pocket nines or something. In the bottom right, I see bet the queens here. People tend to freeze up when they raise and they see an ace high flop, but in general, people just are going to be playing pretty straightforward against you on ace high flops when you're under the gun raising and they flat, because what are they really repping when they raise? Basically like a set, a combo draw, or like 2 pair, and on that board you're not going to have a lot of 2 pairs, so he's not really going to mess around with me much. And you might say, well, you're not going to get value from worse. Well, he's going to float me some there. He's going to call with his pocket 9, sometimes his 7/8 suited. He's going to call at least one street but not bet it. So I think I'm getting some value there. Plus I charge his draws. In the bottom left we see, or in the top left we'll go with first, I defend the ace-2 offsuit against jack. I'm not folding an ace there, 170 big blinds deep against a player I think I have a firm handle against. I decided to raise this flop because his c-bet just kind of looks weakish, like he's trying to find out where he's at, and so I'm going to start out by raising here and just put the doubt in his mind that he does not have the best hand, even if he does have a pair or something on this flop. And I do have my backdoor, or my gut shot to the straight there too, which I do end up hitting. And when I do, we'll just go through this first one against jack, and then we'll rewind to the bottom left hand. I do end up hitting here, and I think if he had a 7 this deep, he'd almost always raise me on the turn. And he only just flats there pretty quickly too, so it looks like he's kind of trying to get a cheap showdown, probably draw. He's probably got a hand like 4, well, he ends up having 4-5. I have the privilege of already seeing this hand like 7 times, but he has 4-5, but I think his timing and his range there, he's going to have a lot of hands like 4-5, 6-5, a lot of 2-pair hands, a lot of pairs plus the straight card just paired, so he's going to make a lot more 2-pair hands than he normally would with that action. And then against up the town here in the bottom left, he limps the button again. I just check right off with the jack 3 offsuit. He's got about a half stack to start the hand, and I flop pretty big here with, come on up, you can do it, just go ahead and limp. But I hit a pretty huge flop of jack 7 with 2 clubs. I can credibly rep like a flush draw or whatever in his mind when I check raise. I'm obviously never folding this hand to this type of player, because he's the type of player who will put in a lot of money with like pocket 9s here. He will do that. He'll have a flush draw sometimes. Yes, if he has a jack, I'm obviously killed, but how often is button first blind going to have both flop trips? And so he 3-bets there. I think his 3-bet is going to have a lot of error here with to a 120, but it's also going to have some like draw hands like 8-9 or some random clubs, or he's going to have a hand like queens, 9s, and whatever that he's obviously not folding. So I think a shove here is definitely best, and he folds pretty quickly. So I guess we ran into the air part of his range. The bet sizing in the top left is I think pretty good. I make a 130 against against a more cognizant player. They're going to like look at this board, realize that I'm kind of milking them or whatever, and against them I'm going to have to balance out my bluffs and value bets here. Against this guy I can kind of just play exploitably. Like if the positions were reversed and Stork was to my right, I would never play this ace-2 hand like this against him, just because my hand just looks a lot like what it is to any competent hand reader. There's a little bit of a lull in action here. Just kind of defend there. Ace-9 offsuit definitely isn't like a standard defense, especially deep. But I just felt like Gale Force was going to play pretty straightforward post-flop for whatever reason. And I could also lead out here on the turn. I definitely think Stork's going to bet this 1,000% of the time when I do check to him. So by not betting there, I'm kind of giving him the green light to take the hand from Gale and I, because Gale has to still contend with me behind, and I'm not doing anything and whatever. Because of that, if I did have a strong hand on the turn, a decent line sometimes is to check raise that turn, because a lot of times Stork will bet there with a huge part of his range, and then Gale will get stubborn with like a middle part. He was pot controlling against two people, and then you can trap a bunch of money in there if you do have a hand that you want to continue, or even a decent semi-bluffing hand. It's a good idea sometimes to check raise there, because they'll put you on a very strong hand. Stork can't really do much about it because he's going to have a huge part of his range there, and then Gale is going to put me on a huge hand check raising into two people. So I definitely, if I had a semi-bluff or a big hand there, I like a check raise a lot more than just barreling through on the turn myself, or leading the turn myself. I'd assume I'm defending against Gale in the top right with ace-3. Ooh, no. I fold for some reason. I normally defend that against that. I think because Gale was kind of not really running me over, but I just hadn't won any sort of sizable pot against Gale for at least the duration of this segment and less. So when that happens, people just aren't going to give you as much credit, and I wanted to really be able to win a pot or show him a big hand before I started playing back at him from position there with a hand as weak as ace-3 offsuit. I guess that was my reasoning for it. I opened eights in the top right, and it's folded against a new player, Mag Factor. I have no history with him. I have no idea who he is. I've never seen him play higher. He bought him for 100 big points. Marmota is back, and this is my favorite hand of the segment, I think. So I open Queen-Jack offsuit on the button. Very standard open for me. Marmota's going to flat here. In the bottom right, I just half pot, and I think take down with tens there. Yeah. It's a very standard open for me. And on this board, I think he's going to have a lot in his flattened range, a lot of hands like King, Queen, King, Jack, whatever. Pocket fives, 9, 10, whatever. So I can take this down a lot with just a half c-bet pot, or half pot c-bet. And it's important to recognize that I'm doing it on board texture instead of my actual strength of the hand. You can't be changing your size very often against someone who's capable. You can't be changing your raise size just based on the strength of your hand. You have to be doing it also on the board texture and what your range. Microphone cut out there for a second. And you have to be doing it, be cognizant of the board texture and what your ranges are perceived by both people to be. And so I thought a half pot bet here with my whole range of continuing is a really good spot here on this type of dry board texture, where if he doesn't have an ace, he's going to have to pretty much give up, at least if not on the flop, later on in the hand. Then he does something that leads into me. I have no idea what this could be, but it just doesn't make any sense. The only hand I think he could lead into me with here, well, it just doesn't make any sense why he'd ever lead into me here. If he had a hand that was strong and nutted, like pocket eights, ace-8, whatever, he'd want me to continue bluffing / value betting myself when I had a hand like king-queen, ace-10, whatever. If he has ace-8 and I have ace-10, I'm definitely going to bet the turn. I'm not going to be like pot controlling. It's only 100 big blinds. He's not going to have a real hard time of kind of playing it coy and getting it in. And so when he leads here, I'm just putting him on all sorts of terrible hands. I'd say his most likely hand would probably be like a hand either turning itself into a bluff, or a hand that just picked up like equity. Let's say 8-9 of spades, or a hand like pocket fives or whatever. Whatever the case, he never has ace king. He never has pocket aces. He never has like real strong aces, like ace queen or whatever, that he wants to lead get it in here. If he does have like ace 10, he doesn't want to lead here because he doesn't want me to stop bluffing, and he doesn't want to shut out hands that are worse than mine because of those reasonings that I just gave. And so I think this is almost always air or a hand turning this hand into a bluff. So with that said, and that's our read on Marmota, how are we going to react to this? I decided to raise here because I can really credibly represent a ton of really strong hands here by raising, and especially small. I was going to raise to 200, but I didn't want him to just shove over with like spades or whatever, because 200, it traps much more money in the middle, and he has a little more incentive to just kind of go crazy. And then he raised to 3 to 2 almost immediately, and it just seems like he obviously doesn't believe I have a hand, but he's also not worried about representing anything really. He's just putting money in because he doesn't think I have a hand, which is an alright strategy against someone who's not very good. But against someone who's thinking and looking at this, I mean, I have queen high, and you can see I'm already depressed the call button. I'm not even thinking twice about floating here. And not many people, a lot of players will float like a flop. They'll float a turn maybe if like it checks through on the flop, but they're not going to be c-betting a flop, raise calling as a float here like ever. This is like a really advanced play that not many people 5'10" and below are ever going to really try to do, especially this shallow, because they think they're running out of room. He's just going to shove in with whatever he has. But when we look at it, what's my range for really flatting here? I've never raise fold. I probably call flat the turn with spades. I'm never like raise calling, like if I had 7-8 of spades myself or whatever, I'd probably just release the hand here and give him credit for something if that was my intention of, okay, if I thought he was strong here, I wouldn't raise call with like 7-8 of spades or whatever. So my hands for raising and then calling this are such strong hands, and because of this board texture, I can represent that I'm just not scared of anything. I'm not scared of any sort of spade on the river. In fact, I'm representing kind of that I'm hoping a spade gets there, because then I'll stack him or whatever. And I'm representing that I'm not going anywhere on this river. So if he does have the outlier of when he has like his pocket eights or whatever and decided to play him randomly like this, I'll probably fold to river shove a good amount of the time. I might hero call it sometimes, because I will be getting pretty decent odds. So I think for a little bit and I call, and I get the best brick ever on the river. And he checks fairly quickly, and he shouldn't ever expect me to bluff this river. My hand looks exactly like a huge hand, or a hand that was like ace jack or ace 10 or whatever. And by this river, I'm not really betting ace 10 for value, I don't think, because I don't really envision him looking me up ever with worse than like a nutted full house here. And I don't really see him checking a really strong hand on this river. So I don't think so if he's not checking a really strong hand, let me rephrase that. He's not checking a really strong hand, but I don't, like, okay, hold on. Okay, I just had to quickly jot down what exactly I was talking about, because I kind of rambled on for the last 10 seconds. But just scratch whatever I said about that. Just basically, whenever he's checking with the timing that we saw here, that he was just kind of realizing that I probably have a huge hand, and he's just checking. I'm not really going to be shoving thinly for value on this river. I'm going to be fairly polarized, because I don't really envision him looking me up with anything light. I think he's going to be giving up a ton of the time, and the only reason I'm shoving with like my nutted hands is because I have like ace king and I can't get beat. So on the off chance that he is calling or slow playing something, then I'm good there. But with like a weak ace or whatever, I just get to showdown, and then I have the added benefit of seeing exactly what he was doing this with. And so that's pretty much how I'd handle that with other hands. I really like my play there, though. I think many average players at the middle stakes would never try to go for those lines, and I just took half a stack off him with queen high, not getting to showdown, and never like having it perceived as like a big bluff or whatever, never giving him a chance to make a hero call, because he just had to shut down there with how my line was. He's just going to get picked off so often there if he shoves there, and I have a huge hand, because with the line I took, I will have a huge hand often. With the queen's hand in there in the top left, I just 3-bet. It was pretty standard, that 3-bet, and then I c-bet the flop, and then we just got to showdown. I don't think I actually checked what he had, but I assume it's like a 10 or worse. In the bottom left, we can start to piece together some clues as to why I think Fish Jest and It's Me Nemo are not strong winning players at this level. They both only have 100 big blinds to start the hand, and they're both flat once Red Walk squeezes. They just can't do this with a myriad of hands that they are doing it with. They can't turn profits with, unless they're kind of trapping or they have some random read on Red Walk, which I doubt they do. These are just both spewy pre-flop calls by them. I get out of the way with King Jack suited there, and then Red Walk just bets like half the pot, and they both instantly fold. So you can tell they're kind of fishier players trying to just hit big flops, and also they respect a king high flop when one flops from a person who's perceived to have like an ace-king type hand. So then in the future, if I do 3-bet them and a king and that type of board texture comes out, I'm probably going to be putting a lot of pressure on them to rep ace-king. These tables are pretty good for 5-10 in the only table, actually they're all pretty good tables for 5-10. They've got a couple strong players, especially to my left on the left 2 tables. Clock Tower and Stork seem to be 2 of the stronger players at these 4 tables, so it sucks that they're both on my left, but they're not really. I think they kind of both equally realize that the tables are soft enough that we don't really have to be getting into 400 big blind pots lightly here, so we're kind of just playing ourselves there. And even though I said, let's rewind here for a second, even though I said Fish yesterday is a fishier player, I decide that since he has 800 to start the hand, I can show a profit by 3-betting here to like 130, I think I do. It's not a terrible idea, because it'll start to 130 threatens to stack a lot more, so for that like extra 15 or whatever compared to the normal 3-bet size, it's going to get a lot more folds out of this type of player. But he just immediately flats, so I guess that was a flawed plan to begin with. And I get a flop that's kind of tricky to c-bet into, and at this point I'm done with the hand. But then I get a really good turn, and I think I should be betting here a decent amount of time, because on this turn, in his eyes, like, his draws are going to have much less value. I could have easily whiffed a check raise on the flop, and he would expect me to bet a lot of draws once this happens, so he's going to like give me more credit for a hand. And I think it's also less likely, since the 8 pair, that he has an 8 or a pair at all, and I don't think he's going to look me up very light there. That being said, he does show up with ace-king, and so I think he probably would have called on the turn there, and I would have been forced to triple barrel, which I'm not sure if I was comfortable with at the time. So if I'm not going to do that, I don't mind giving up there and just seeing his showdown. In the top right, I don't really know who your Moolah is. I haven't seen him at all. He opens, I flat with ace-jack suited. You can 3-bet there, but the problem is we're only 100 big blinds deep. I can't put a ton of pressure on him and can't really do a lot if he 4-bets. I can like shove over him, but it's really, really marginal, even blind versus blind. So I decided to just see a flop. I float the turn because I think I have the best hand enough. A lot of his hands picked up like backdoor equity, like any hearts he's betting on this turn, any ace-4, ace-3 is going to bet a lot on the turn. And I think I'm good at almost 100% on the river. I decide to overbet here, and the reasoning is that I think his calling range is fairly polarized. Either he has a hand like 5-6, pocket 6s, ace-2 or whatever, that wants to make a hero call because all of the draws missed, or he's got air. I don't think he's ever calling me or check raising or whatever with a hand worse than like with like ace high or worse. So I think my overbet there kind of slices his hero call range. I think I almost always have the best hand, and I think I allow him I make more money when he does decide to hero call, and I think his hero call frequency is going to be just as much for 240 as it is for like 130 in that scenario, because my hand just doesn't. It looks like a misdraw or whatever. It looks like I should have been playing an 8 faster with how drawy the board was, and any other hand, like either I have a huge hand or nothing, and when you show up with a pretty decent hand but not a huge hand, you can trap all of his bluff catchers in there. I should have opened that ace-3 offsuit in the top right, just because Marmota's going to play me very scared now after I did that whole elaborate thing where it was obvious he was pretty much on air, and he's going to play pretty straightforward, and mag factor doesn't seem to be really mixing it up at all, with me at least. Bottom right, it's just a bad situation for both of them. Well, I guess it's a better situation for Moy runs now, but I think that's fine. Aces versus kings, even 200 big blinds deep, you're just not going to get away like middle to late position. And it's not so much that he's flatting there to get away with his kings, it's more that he's flatting there to keep the range of clock tower very wide. And so I think it doesn't go all in pre-flop, because once you do get pre-flop, then their range becomes very strong, but the range is still very wide when it's 3 and 4 bet pre-flop. He can represent a much wider range of hands because they're so deep. He can credibly rep that he was just floating with like a suited connect or a low pocket pair or whatever, and then get a lot more value out of clock towers like jacks and tens that might fold if he shoves in pre. I'm not sure if he would, but he has a much better chance of doing that, of getting value post with his kings than pre. And then he spikes the king on the river, which is obviously a great result for him. Don't remember if I checked what mag factor had in the top right, but it's definitely an odd hand to have him up there. It's something to just be. We already know that Marmota plays kind of odd, and we have a pretty decent read on him just from. I've also played him like a year and a half ago when I was playing 5-10, just grinding a bunch because I was trying to rework my game, and I played him a bunch, and he seems to be playing the exact same as he did when I used to play 5-10. So I still have that latent read from him. We don't really have a read on mag factor yet, or Yuramula, other than he stabbed a turn and then gave up. But other than that, they're fairly vague reads we have so far. Marmota's raise sizes are really, really weird, like 79 to 30. Like, yeah, I'm advocating small raise sizes and small 3-bet sizes in position, but 79 is just way too small. You're not. Yeah, you'll get some folds, but you're not like making it tough on them. You're just like, they can just flat, and then now what do you do? Yeah, you're playing in position for like $50 more, but it also reopens the action, and it's not enough money that they're flatting there to make it a huge mistake for them to warrant reopening the action with such a wide range. I make it 82 here, but notice it's only to a $21 open instead of a $30 open. And I think we see that Jack made it $21 there because the big blind was a smaller stack, and so when the big blind is that smaller stack, he's probably going to be making his weaker holdings 21. He might be balancing it out with making all of his holdings 21, but I kind of doubt it from this player. And then he instantly snaps when he's 3-bet there with a half stack. He should just be shoving that in with his entire range. There's no reason, because let's say that Jack was at the top. The reasoning is, let's say that Jack was at the top of his range in this with pre-flop with aces, kings, whatever. He doesn't want the board to come out like this, and then like fourth hard hit, and either have the worst hand or have the small blind be scared of putting in his money with like black kings or whatever. And also when he does have like huge cooler situations of like, or not huge coolers, but like when he does have like kings against this guy's queens, he doesn't want the board to come out ace, 10 or whatever and lose value and have to play his hand defensively himself. With a half stack, it's not really defensively, but whatever. I think that's a really bad peel pre-flop by Jack. Even though like hand showed up with the same hand, ace jack suited is just not going to hit enough flops. You're just going to run out of time in terms of his stack size until you can make some. You can't make moves ever really, and ace jack suited behind his 3-betting range. Even though they showed up with the same hand, I would assume the small blind's out of position 3-betting range is much stronger than having ace jack suited be the average. Let's rework this hand really quick and see how this plays out. In the bottom right, we're looking at against JJF Gasp. Gasp spelled wrong, but I'm still going to call it Gasp. He opens here, and he also does some weird open amounts. It seems like everyone from I guess 25 isn't that weird, but he definitely does do some of the $28, $23 opens, stuff like that. And now I'm looking at the hand that I have for him. Oh, okay, this player, he's just this check in this hand history and the check back on the turn or on the river is just inexplicable, because from how everything was going, it just looks like Lucifer has a flush like all the time. However, this hand went out, and so he should be betting here and getting paid off a lot of the time. So he's probably not going to be betting very thinly for value on the river. He's probably going to polarize it, and probably it's going to be mostly when he's putting a lot of money in, he probably has it. And I'm just reviewing that note there really quick. I decided to 3-bet him because we have deeper stacks and I can represent a lot of hands, and he's just going to play fit or fold a lot of the time. I turn a double gutter, and the pot is now $512. I also 3-bet in the top right against that weaker player, Yuramula, and I think he's going to give me credit a good amount of the time. I'm not sure exactly if it works in the top right this time. And then I check back the turn because I just don't envision him folding a lot of his range there. He does end up have sixes, which I think is one of the hands I could get him off of, but I think he, on average, he'll end up with like a 9 or a small overpair there a lot of the time. That is, with so many draws out there, there's no way he's going to fold, so I decided to just give up. I bet in the top right. It's kind of a scary board, but it's scary in the fact that he has to put in a raise there, and it kind of forces him to have something. I was gonna bet here on the bottom right, but with that ace there, I don't think I get a lot of action. I have all the sevens blocked, so he can't have like 6-7, 5-7, whatever. So I think a lot of his hands are like spade draws that might have the ace, and now I'm just value betting myself, or like hands that are just gonna fold. And I wasn't really interested in putting too much more money in the pot. I just want to kind of get to showdown. He ends up showing pocket threes, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think he played his hand alright. Maybe raise the flop if he wants to start putting some pressure on me, because he has a decent amount of semi-bluffing outs that he could probably get me off of, like pocket nines, and wouldn't force him to make the best hand. But how he played it is definitely fine. Right, we're getting kind of late in the video here, and there's probably about 15, maybe 30 more minutes of footage, 35, that I want to go through for the fourth part, so I'm probably going to wrap it up here fairly soon. Maybe let a couple more hands go through, see if there's any interesting spots. Yeah, but just in general, like, I think that Marmota hand definitely is indicative of some higher level thinking of how you can credibly exploit someone who's thinking on a lower level than you, and what's the best way to do that. A lot of people, if they thought he was bluffing, would just shove in there, but that's risking too much money, because I don't think he's ever bluffed shoving the river, and so it allows me to gain the same amount of information I would by shoving the river myself, by shoving the turn myself, because when I am called, I'm almost always dead with like 8s full of aces or whatever, and so it allows me to gain that information for 5. I have to risk the same amount of money by shoving the river myself, but I am gaining the information for only the $200 instead of $700, whatever a shove would have been to him. I don't think many would assume that you could just flat there and then as a float and then shove the river. And it's important to always just kind of just be like questioning your lines, figuring out different things. Like even now, like with that ace jack offsuit hand against Gale Force earlier in the video, where I'm questioning that line. Well, I know it's obviously a terrible line in retrospect, but maybe I think that line was good at the time, and now a week or two later in review, I'm like, oh, that line was terrible. What was I thinking? And so now, once I get into that situation again versus that player, we'll have a much better idea of what we're doing. We'll say, okay, if a club hits, I'm check raising. If no club hits, I'm leading. All these different things, where I'm going to have a much stronger contingency plan than I would in general. I just flat there. I've got ace-7 suited. I've seen Gale Force make these raises with like 9s and like 8s and like small pocket pairs as well as big pocket pairs. I don't think he has an unpaired big cards, so I think he always has a pocket pair. And now I hit a flush draw on the flop, but we have to look at what are we looking to do here? What are we reading here? I don't think he'd really bet out with like his underpairs like 9s or 8s, so I'm only playing the hand now for my straight flush draw value. And probably my ace. If I hit my ace, I'm almost always good too because of whatever. And so, that being said, what's the best way to do this? Well, I can shut out mag factor there by raising myself. I can also rep a lot of I can rep a pretty strong hand here by raising here. I know if he did lead out with like his 9s or his 8s or whatever, which I'm thinking in retrospect, I think he did c-bet those, because if he didn't, I don't really see a reason for me to raise this flop. So I'm almost positive that he did start c-betting those like under pairs or whatever he 3-bet against us earlier in a couple sessions earlier, or a couple hours in the session earlier from when I was trying to just collect a bunch of footage. If that's the case, I like my raise on the flop here. I don't, because it will knock out all those hands, and then I'm just hoping to hit an ace or a club. And when I don't, on the turn or river, I'm just done with the hand. And he shows pocket kings. I think he played his hand fine. He played a little defensively, and I think that's fine though, because I will show up with some big hands there that make kings really hurt. And the fact though that I'm not bluffing that turn, because I definitely wasn't planning on bluffing it even if the 10 didn't pair, kind of argues for the fact that he should be raising the flop, because he's not going to get any more money off me, and he's going to see those turns that I'm going to see the turn and river for free. I think we'll end with this hand. No, actually, hold on. Actually, what I'm going to do is just end right there, and then this ace's hand ends up being a pretty interesting hand in a pretty decent sized pot, and we can start the fourth session off with a bang there. I'm thinking this session we saw a lot of good things. I think it's almost better when I sometimes make mistakes, because then I can go back and it's much easier to review your play in video form, and I actually might start just recording some of my sessions when I'm playing higher stakes and having trouble with some players, just because it is much easier to just go back with a open mind and see, well, why did I do these things? Why would I raise the ace-7 there? Well, it was probably because he was leading his 8s and 9s there and then folding if I raised over. But I think that's a good play for that time, but it might not be in the future since he just saw me show down that hand. So it's really a good way to kind of create a checks and balances system for your game and of what you're doing. As I also said during the video, it's important when you are playing what you think is not your best game that you definitely have to constantly check yourself and check your image on each table. Like, Stork didn't see the fact that I had rivered that straight. By all he knew, I either bluffed him or had a huge hand on the turn. And so, though in my mind we're a little unsure and we think that play might have been suboptimal to shoving with the 10-9 offsuit on the turn, he'll never know that. So we have to realize what information we have in total, and then what information that has leaked through to our opponents and how we think they're going to react to that. And that's always a very important exercise to conduct while you're playing. Just every 10 or 15 minutes say, okay, what's my image at each of these tables? And that's something that really, like, stats can help. The problem is, like, if the you have to look at, like, stats per the table for these players, because for, like, my stats per each table, because a lot of these players aren't playing on all the tables other than, like, Stork, basically. And if they don't see all these hands, then you're kind of overplaying your hand. Or like overcompensating for things. So if you make a 3-barrel bluff in the bottom left table, and then in the top right table you're like, oh, well, I can go for thin value here because I just 3-barrel bluffed in the bottom left. Well, the guy in the top right wasn't at the table and has no idea that you did that. You have to be cognizant of each table, which is really hard to do when you're at like 12 tabling or whatever. So I like to play probably like 4 to 6, maybe 8 tables at most, and those were I only play more amount of tables when it's with people I'm fairly familiar with. And so I definitely would try that as an exercise of, if you're trying to move up at stakes, it's 6 max, of cutting down the number of tables and just kind of really focusing in on honing reads and playing the best you can. So hopefully we'll have part 4 coming up for you guys right after this, and I hope you guys learned something. Leave any comments, whatever, in the video. And this is Scott Augustine for cardrunners.com.